Hello everyone, we are here with Janet Duncan in London. She's the founder of Spiritism in the UK, and we have a pleasure to be here with her, and we would like to thank her very much for her hospitality and her time as well. It's today is the 4th of February of 2014, and we wanna interview her with some basic questions which we believe that's very important to share with you all that are in the Spiritist movement. So Janet, thanks so much. Good morning.
Good morning.
And I will start with this basic question that it's very interesting to know what made you go to live in Brazil? What made you go there and live in Brazil?
Yes, this seems to be a very simple question, but it doesn't really have such a simple answer in a way, and I often find it very difficult to answer this question because I never know quite how to approach it. I can say the good spirits took me to Brazil, but it is quite true that the final decision for me and my husband in let's see when the war finished. The war finished in 38. No, it began in 38, didn't it? It finished in 45, there, around 45. When my husband was demobbed from the Polish Air Force, we didn't quite know what to do. But circumstances around, and from his best friend who'd already gone to Brazil to live with his brother and brother's wife, kept writing us letters to say we had to go to Brazil, we had to go to Brazil. But nothing more detailed was ever said than just those words. And we decided that we needed to think about this. It was not a small step. We had to leave England, and we had a job offer from his ex-squadron leader who'd gone to the States and set up a business there. And he wanted to give my husband a job contract to go and work with him. So we thought the intelligent, sensible idea was to take that up. Just we had to go to Brazil didn't offer us any prospects at all. And once we started to get our documentation to go to the States, there'd been a number of months without any more letters from Brazil. And then all of a sudden, there was another letter. Same kind of thing, you've got to come to Brazil, you've got to come to Brazil. And both of us, we stopped because we'd made our decision where we were going. And it sort of shook us. And I remember we were sitting around the breakfast table that morning, and we were really very hesitant. My husband always found it very difficult to make decisions. So he was holding the letter in his hand and he was going pacing backwards and forwards in the kitchen there. And then in the end he said, "Oh, you decide, Janet." And he gave me the letter, and immediately, without a forethought about anything, I held the letter in my hand. And it always makes me feel emotional when I talk about this. And I closed my eyes and I took my thoughts up. And I waited a moment, and I got the answer. And the answer was Brazil.
Wow.
So just on that, we changed our plans and we went to Brazil.
Okay, wow. And that was 19...
That was, well, the decision day, I can't remember exactly,
Sure.
But we arrived in Brazil the 15th of January 1951.
Okay, wow.
And perhaps I could even add, we'd had a 2-week boat trip because nobody flew by plane in those days. We sailed into Rio on the 14th of January, and I was very thrilled. We're walking down the Avenida Rio Branco. How wonderful, we're in Brazil. But it was just like a plain ordinary tourist in Rio.
Okay.
And that was all very nice, and one thing and another. We were sort of a little bit excited, and we got back on the ship, and the next morning we landed in Santos, in São Paulo. And this was a totally different story. I'm going to have serious trouble with my emotions at this point. As the boat started going up the river into the docks of Santos, everybody on the ship got very excited, and there were many, many young people, many, many young Germans there, and all sorts of young people from Europe. And everybody was conscious of going to a new life. And they were all excited, they were all running up on deck. And I'd been down in our cabin, and with all the commotion, I went upstairs. My husband had already gone up on deck. And when I got up on the top deck there, everybody's around there, everybody's excited and chatting. But beyond them, there was the spiritual world with us. A tremendous gathering of the spirits welcoming all their family members. And around me, there was a tremendous clamour of spirits saying, "You've come home, you've come home."
Oh.
And the amount of love that came with these thoughts and these voices, everything, it was so special, so beautiful. I was very emotioned with it, but it still didn't really click then as to the full meaning. It took quite a long while afterwards before the significance of that really came home.
Wow, that was actually, it's going to ask you how was how did you feel that? So I think you answered this question very, very, very informative. And then I guess you stayed in Santos. That's my next question.
We went to São Paulo because my husband's friend lived with his wife in the city of São Paulo.
Oh, I see. And then how long did you live there in Brazil? For how long?
30 years.
Wow, 30 years.
Until it must have been the 31st of December. No, wait a minute, I'm trying to remember the exact day I arrived in London finally. Yes, it was about the middle, if I'm not mistaken. It was in the first few days, I'll put it like that, in the first few days of January 1981.
I see. And I'm assuming that before you arrived in Brazil, you didn't speak Portuguese?
No.
No, not at all. Okay. So you learned Portuguese in Brazil?
Yes.
I see. And you haven't, when you were in the UK, what were your thoughts about Brazil? Did you know much about the country, about the nation, the culture?
I knew I'd always been enthusiastic about Carmen Miranda and her films.
Okay.
Rio de Janeiro as a town had always sort of had a little magic touch to the name, but I'd never dreamed of ever going there.
Wow, I see.
And other than that, I knew absolutely nothing about Brazil.
Brazil. Okay. And also your
Except
husband.
it was a tropical climate.
So also your husband as well. He didn't
Exactly.
know much. Oh, I see.
Neither of us knew a word. I think we could say sim and não and bom dia. That would have been the absolute maximum of our Portuguese.
And having said that, how was your adaptation to the country, to the culture, the language, the people? How was that?
I can only speak for myself.
Sure.
I was enchanted with the people. I felt very comfortable there. They were all very friendly. To be in the sunshine, the long days, no more dark nights and all that sort of thing like we have our climate in England. One thing that impressed me tremendously, you could set your clocks right every afternoon on the dot of 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We had a tremendous downpour.
Nice.
That lasted 10 or 15 minutes. That was it. But the most tremendous tropical downpour.
I see.
And you could set your clocks right, watches by that. It's incredible.
I see. Janet, so then you lived in São Paulo.
In various areas and around in the suburbs of that area. All the time I was in Brazil.
I see. So then you became kind of a Paulista, living in
yes,
São Paulo.
Because I took out nationalisation after 10 years.
Oh, I see.
And was very proud to be able to show my Brazilian passport.
Okay.
And call myself a Brazilian.
That's good to know. Muito bom. Okay. And so in your experience there, we understand that that's there in Brazil that you have met Francisco Cândido Xavier, our Chico Xavier. Is that right? You met him there in Brazil. And how was this meeting? What made you go and meet Chico Xavier?
Well, once again, you see, I've always been in contact with my friends in the spiritual world. And they came again, as they have done at periods all through my life, came to tell me that I had to go and talk to this medium. They even said that he had a message for me. Mm. Now, I knew through the television and a very famous program that was called Pingo Fogo.
Sí, Pingo Fogo.
So I'd seen him, and I'd been... my psychic faculty had been increasing, enlarging, and I was becoming, for the first time in my life, interested to do a bit of research and etc. about this faculty. And when I watched this program, that was very interesting, but it gave me the total conviction that this was a really genuine medium.
I see.
And once I had, for my own self, satisfied myself that this was a genuine medium, then they came to tell me I had to go and see him and that he had a message for me.
And this was the specific year. Can you
This was in
remember?
1971.
I see. So I understand that you had knowledge, experience with the spirits, and you knew that the communication between us in the material world was possible with them in the spiritual world. Is that correct?
I had been in contact with the spiritual world ever since I periodically, ever since I was 4.5 years of age.
Oh, I see. I see. And
they guided me through my life on many, many occasions. and helped me and protected me. One circumstance in my very early years, I was in danger of being attacked, seriously attacked from the spiritual level, and I was warned about that, and when the attack actually happened on several occasions, they were there and used my mother very much and her love for me to help protect me and calm me down and one thing and another, you know. But in the end they gave me specific instructions as to how another attack, the most serious attack, would happen, and what I needed to do to be able to be protected.
Okay.
So I mean, the life in the spiritual world has always been a total normality to me.
I see. And so, but Spiritism itself, then probably I think with this question now we can explore this, I think. So then you went to meet Chico Xavier. Can you, so how was this experience of meeting Chico?
Well,
do you remember that? How was that?
Oh, very definitely. It's one of the highlights of my my life, this incarnation, this physical life. But I would just mention that prior to this circumstance, I had already been looking around at different things, and I'd been told from my spiritual friends for the previous 10-year period that I had to look for something. I had to find something, and it was going to be very important for me. But they would never tell me what it was I was looking for. And I used to argue with them. And this, I would just put it in back, it was usually a thought process. Not voiced. Very seldom did I put my thoughts in words. It was almost exclusively a thought process. They would not tell me, just that it was very important. In the end, because of my persistence in wanting to know what it was, because I'm a very logical, rational person, and how could I be asked to look for something without being told what it was I was looking for? So in the end, they just told me that when I found it, I would know I found it. And I can assure you they got back a very, very sarcastic reply from me, because it told me absolutely nothing.
Okay.
But the day happened when I was browsing through some books in a bookshop, and I'd got to the point of going to a Spiritist bookshop by then. I'd heard of Allan Kardec, and I was beginning to be inquisitive. And I found a particular book that had the most important question. It's a book of questions and answers, and the book was prepared by this Allan Kardec that I was getting to know, and he had several books. And I looked at various bits, opened the book in various places, and then I decided I was going to look at question number 1. And when I looked at that question number 1, there was sort of a bell rang, because it's a question that almost everybody asks sooner or later, and sometimes it's asked frequently by the same person. And I myself had asked these questions many, many times since childhood, and I could never find the answer. And I wasn't particularly happy with the actual question itself. And when I opened this particular book, the question was posed in a totally new form. And that's what rang the bell for me. Because I said, this book's got something different to say. So I took the book home, and when I got, I was very anxious to read it. As I say, the whole book is just questions and answers, questions and answers. and the answers were supposed to have come from the spiritual world. And when I got to question number 3 in chapter 3, it was like an explosion. Like a flash of lightning or a roll of thunder or whatever. And I was shaken to the core. I had found what I had been told to look for. And I've never stopped studying this philosophy and these teachings. And I never will.
That's good. Thanks, Janet. And so I think from this moment. Okay, Janet. And how was your experience in meeting Chico Xavier? How was that?
Well, it's a moment, one of the few, but I have several few experiences that have marked my whole life. And these very, very special moments, I find it very difficult to talk about them without reliving them and telling them in detail, because unless I do that, they lose all significance.
Sure.
It's just a few words with no meaning, no sentiment behind them. But I'll try to be as brief as I can. I've told this story many times. When the time came, when I say the time, when I mean the date came that I knew, I was being told I had to go to Uberaba. I was told the day I needed to go to the bus station to buy my ticket. Now, I'll just say I'd never travelled in the interior of Brazil before then, and I'd certainly never travelled on my own. And I was a little bit scared because it's such a vast country. It's incredible for English people to ever come to the reality of the tremendous vastness of Brazil. And this city where Chico Xavier lives, Uberaba, it was an 11-hour coach journey from São Paulo. So it can give you a rough idea of how far away it was. I'm afraid I can't tell you in how many kilometres it was, but it took the coach travelling at a good speed 11 hours to get there. So you left early in the morning, but when I went to book my ticket, I didn't know any of these things. It was just a name, another town in Brazil, and I didn't look at the map in those days. Remember, we didn't have computers and websites and all those things. So they told me, as I say, the day I had to go to the bus station to buy my ticket, and they told me the time in the morning that I should buy the bus ticket for. And I did all these things, and then the day came about 10 days later when I was packing my bag. And I was still very, very worried, preoccupied, in fact, because I had the name of a person and I had the name of a town in another state, the other side of Brazil. And I'm English and I need an address. And they wouldn't give it to me. So on the night before, the bus I had to take was 6:30 in the morning the next day, and packing my bags, I was desperately worried, but how can I go to this town? I've only got a person's name, and I had no idea if it was a little village or a big city or what. I've got a man's name and the name of the town. How on earth am I ever going to find this person? And eventually I heard a big sigh from the spiritual side. They were worn out with my questioning. And the answer came this time. I got an answer. But I didn't get an address, because I was told that I would meet some people on the coach that would take me there. So all went as planned. And at the first stop, because in a long journey like this you stop periodically to go and have some coffee and a roll and butter and something like that. The first stop, a good 100 miles, 100 kilometres or so on the journey. When I came back onto the bus, the coach, which had very, very few people on it, it was almost empty. And the lady who'd been sitting next to me and we'd been chatting, as all good Brazilians do, you don't sit beside each other in silence, you chat, you tell them your life story. And I came back on the bus, and as I stepped onto the coach, I should say, I heard her say, "Oh, Janet, don't worry, the people sitting in front of us are going to take you." So she'd been telling the people on the coach while I was having coffee all my story and my worry, and they were going to go to Chico Xavier. They'd been there before, they knew exactly what to do. So that was another thing. So anyway, when it came time to go to his meeting and go through the door of his centre into a sort of courtyard area, and a small, very simple building facing me, 20-30 metres in front of me, to my horror, I saw the most gigantic queue from the doorway to go into his receiving room. I looked and looked, and the queue went on. I couldn't see the end of the queue, and I was horrified immediately, because I'm English and you keep your queues. I'd gone all through the war years and I was very much drilled in queues, and you were going to get lynched if you dared to, jump a queue. And I couldn't go to try to find the end of the queue, because I thought, well, I'm never ever going to see this man, and I'd come all this long journey. And I started getting very, very agitated. And one of the workers at the centre came up to me and said, "Oh, what can I help you? What's the matter?" And I said, "Oh, well, the queues are so long and I never get to speak to Chico," and etc. And I was weeping. And she said, "No, don't worry, don't worry. You go and stand by the door there at the front of the queue and you go straight in." I said, "I can't do that." Well, to cut a long story short, eventually I did. The queue just looked at me with curiosity. Nobody made any attempt to lynch me. And I ended up standing right beside the door. And I'd been told, when the door opens, you go in. And the door opened and I went in, and I was the 6th person to speak to him.
Oh, I see.
And this was the first thing that impressed me so much with Chico, because our custom is that you do interviews and you see people from this time to that time, and if people haven't been said, well, that's too bad, you come back another day. That was not Chico's method. He would sit there at the table, or stand up, as he was actually in those days, and he would not move and begin the meeting for that night and his other work until he had seen and talked to every single one of those hundreds of people waiting. To me, this was almost magical. And I was tremendously impressed. When it eventually came my turn, I didn't quite know what to say to him. Because who was I? This was Brazil's most famous medium. And how could I just go and say, well, I've been told to come here and you've got a message for me? So I wasn't making much sense when he asked me various questions. And as in Spiritism, we do have a very large book where you put down names of people who need spiritual help. And so in the end, he wasn't being able to find out either exactly who I was, because when he asked me, what's your name? I said Janet. And where have you come from? I said Sao Paulo. And he was totally bewildered. Completely bewildered. And he then asked me a few more questions, and he'd go back to those two questions, asked me again. I always gave the same answer. My name is Janet and I've just arrived from Sao Paulo. Where have you come from? Sao Paulo. He didn't ask me, where were you born?
I see.
Or what nationality or anything like that, you know. So, I mean, these were the answers, and I mean, they were 100% true answers. And after the third time he asked me the questions, and I still gave the same answers, and he continued to be totally confused and bewildered, he said, oh, well, I know what. He said, I'll write your name down in the book, in the healing book, they called it. And he went away, he walked across the room 3 or 4 meters, bent over this enormous, great, old-fashioned ledger that they were using for this purpose, bent over with his back to me and started writing. After a few moments, he looked back over his right shoulder to me and he said, what did you say your name was? How do you spell it? And I went over to look and see what he'd written in the book. And then I was totally in total confusion, and I didn't know what to do, and I just replied to him, oh, Shika, write whatever you like, it doesn't matter, just write whatever you like, it doesn't, and I ran away.
Okay.
Why? He'd written my true name fully in the book.
Without knowing, without...
He'd never heard this. I'd only told him I'm Janet from Sao Paulo. I never told him anything else.
Wow. So he wrote your name and you didn't tell him?
My true name, my real name, because Janet is a nickname.
Okay.
My real name is Jean Annette.
And he knew that?
And he wrote it down beautifully in the book.
Oh. Oh wow, and I guess your reaction was very surprised.
So, I mean, I had not had any doubt about the legitimacy of this medium, and I was so emotionally amazed that they had bothered to give me a proof of his mediumship. I didn't need it, but they gave it to me anyway. And that began, I'm happy to say, our friendship.
So that's when began your friendship
with
Chico Xavier.
And I've been to visit him and talk to him, became a friend. And I went back to Brazil in 2000 because I knew he was very, very soon going to be returning to the spiritual world. He was very old and very, very sick. And we had our last meeting. And it was very, very beautiful. And we have arranged that he will be there to meet me when it's my turn to go back.
Oh, that's nice. that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing this your experience with Chico, and it's.
There are many, many other things to be said about this medium. The wonderful books that he received in complete trance mediumship. He has today had published 556, or is it 456?
I think it's 400.
456, excuse me, books already published. He returned to the spiritual world in 2002, but the backlog of the books that he had received through psychography or automatic writing was so great that they took a few years still being able to prepare the books for publication.
That's a very good point, and we are going probably to talk about that soon, about the publications, the books, and that's very interesting, Janet. Okay, Janet, when did you come back to the UK, and what made you come back to the UK?
Yes, it's quite interesting that you asked that question, because in actual fact I had always vowed that I would never, ever come back to the UK. I intended and wished that the rest of this incarnation would be lived in Brazil, where I found love in the sense of a loving people, not personal love. A country that I was at home with. And when I was getting ready to come back to London, I'll tell you why in a moment, and packing my bags, my friends were asking, well, how long are you going to be? When do you come back? And I said, in the beginning, I was saying, maximum 5 years. But when it came to the last day in Brazil, and they were still asking me the question, I said, well, I'm not sure, between 5 and 10 years. But I was still determined that I would eventually return to Brazil in this life, in this incarnation. Why did I come back? Because my only living relative, my mother, was very ill, very old, and unable to live alone anymore in the country, in the UK. And having read and studied the Gospel according to Spiritism, I realized that the one thing we must not do, no matter what, for whatever reason, we must never abandon our parents. Because even if we've had unhappiness with our relationships with our parents, either one of them, we have a duty to them, because they have given us the physical body that enables us to have the present incarnation. And you can't buy a physical body in a supermarket. You've got to have the consent and all the hard work over a 20-year period, as well as the gestation period of pregnancy, to produce this physical body for us to utilize during physical life, which we call incarnation. I came back. Sorry, you asked me two questions. What were they?
Yeah,
when did I come back?
Yeah, when did you
and
come
why?
back, and why?
When?
Yeah,
Yes, when. I think in actual fact that has been answered. I arrived back in this country in the early days of January of 1971. I can't remember.
1981, is that right?
1981, yes,
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
sure.
yes, 81.
Sure. Okay, so I think that's answered. Thanks. So when you arrived in London, I guess you founded a Spiritist center or group. Is that right?
Well, things didn't really happen like that at all. No.
No.
I came back as being the duty to look after my mother.
Okay.
She passed on after only a year and a half. And then I had a sequence of 2 other deaths. My only other, I said my mother was my last living relative, last living parent, perhaps I should have said, because there was one other living relative, my father's aunt, my father's sister, my aunt.
Sure.
And I had a very nice and friendly and warm, loving relationship with that aunt, although I'd hardly ever seen her in my life. But as soon as I came back and was living in London, she was in Kensington, and I would go quite frequently to visit her, and we really found that we did love each other. She's a lovely lady. As soon as my mother died, she started to get ill. There was not a great deal of difference in their ages, and it ended up by me nursing her and very soon burying her. And even so, before she finally died, an old English friend of mine that I'd met in Brazil many years ago, and who for some years previously had been living with a married daughter in Germany, she arrived on my doorstep dying with cancer. And I had her to look after and bury her. By the time all of this took about 3 years, but before my friend died, I had already started missing my work in Brazil with the Spiritist movement, my Spiritist centre in São Paulo, and the studies and everything. And I had joined spiritualism here in this country, but they were not open to accept the Spiritist teachings as codified by Allan Kardec. So that didn't work out to be a very happy relationship. But I had been praying, and I had been doing the weekly prayer study that Spiritists do in their homes every week. And it's called the Gospel in the Home meeting. And I was praying for some people that I could find, English people that I could find that would be interested to study with me. And the spirits very kindly arranged a group of 6 English people who wanted to come. And I won't go into all the minute details of this meeting, but it was definitely organised by the spiritual world, who took me down to the local bookshop that was exceptionally a spiritual bookshop. There's not many in this country, spiritual, not spiritist, spiritual bookshops here, but there was one locally. And there I was introduced to the fact that there were 6 English people who were looking to find somebody who could help them understand and study the Spiritist teachings as codified by Allan Kardec. And immediately we started having a little meeting on a Monday in my sitting room in my house.
Oh, I see.
It just happened like that. I was very happy, and over a 2-year period the group grew from 2 to 15,
Okay.
all English. And in all of this time I had not found a single Brazilian person in London. I didn't go out looking for them or anything, but nobody ever came to cross my path. And then all of a sudden one Sunday my doorbell rang, and there was a young couple from my Spiritist group in São Paulo, announcing they'd just arrived in London to come and help me with the Spiritist work. Oh, well, that's very nice, because we've got more people now, we can do more things. But I was just taking this whole study business sort of day by day. And once they came, then soon after came another Brazilian couple to help. In the meantime, a spiritualist medium had come along and whisked away all my English people, left only one. And the Brazilians know the Brazilians. So it started growing, changing from an all-English group to an all-Brazilian group studying in English in London. And then it got to a point, another 2 years along, oh well, it's time now for us to go public. We can have a public meeting, and we hired a hall and we started public meetings. And it just grew. And eventually those people in that first meeting group Brazilians. They hardly any English people, just one or two English people. And it grew, and then they decided they wanted to go and open their group and split up. And it just grew.
Wow.
By that time, I was realizing that I did have a job to do here.
Indeed, yeah.
But it all happened completely without my awareness.
Can I say then that you founded this Spiritist group, and which the name, when was that exactly? Do you remember the year that was founded, and what's the name of the group?
The group once we went public, we decided that it had to have a name.
Sure.
So we decided we'd call it the Allan Kardec Study Group.
Okay.
But as time has gone on, and there's been a great deal of spreading of the teachings all across our planet, and in Brazil, all the Spiritist groups were named after saints. Almost always saints or well-known people, well-known mediums or something like that. But nobody had ever thought of calling a Spiritist group by the name of the coordinator, Allan Kardec. But as the people started spreading out into the other countries, and they all got the idea, so now today we've got hundreds of groups that call themselves Allan Kardec. And so we have to be now Allan Kardec UK, because otherwise nobody knows, which Allan Kardec study group it is.
That's a good thing. Okay. And the year was exactly 1980?
No, 1983 was, I've dated it from when I had my first group of 6 English people studying with me in my sitting room.
Okay.
Where we are doing this recording now, today.
So exactly, you had this task of bringing Spiritism to the UK, and that's very, very, very important. And can I ask you, so the Allan Kardec Study Group, how is it organized, and what's your function nowadays there in the group?
Very little changed to what it was in the very first meeting. Now, we have to understand one or two things, because in Brazil, a Spiritist centre is a building. You're not allowed to register unless you have a building that can accommodate the centre, and because you have various rooms, you have meetings, the centre is open all day, every day, and you have all sorts of different activities, frequently several activities going on in different rooms at the same time. Unfortunately, outside of Brazil, and I stress that because it is literally outside of Brazil, or perhaps I could even say outside South America, because most of the groups in South America follow quite religiously the same format as Brazil. And one or two countries like Portugal and Spain and in France, where, let us remember something very important that we have almost forgotten, because so many people believe that Spiritism is Brazilian. It is not.
Very good point.
It originated through Allan Kardec. That was his nom de plume. His real name was
Hippolyte
Denisard Rivial, a Frenchman living in Lyon. And in his day, he did a lot of spreading of the Spiritist teachings across Europe, and there were formed a very solid foundation in Spain and in Portugal that have maintained all the time. That's over the 150 years, because the Spirits book was first published in 1857. And there was great spreading. Allan Kardec was a polyglot, and he could write and speak in half a dozen or more different languages, and he spread out the books. Sometimes they got translated, but a lot of people spoke French, because in those days the second language around the world was French, you know. And the books he sent very early on to Portugal and to Brazil. But I'm beginning to lose the track of what I'm trying to say to you a little bit here.
No, it's fine. It's very informative.
The teachings are international for our planet. And although there is a strong religious or moral aspect to these teachings, they are non-denominational, we'll say. These teachings show us the future, the way of life for the future, when we all think and believe and live our lives according to the teachings that Jesus gave us more than 2,000 years ago. And as I said, going back to what I was talking about, the groups and the buildings, we don't charge for anything. We all work as volunteers. And so we always have very little money. In Brazil, things are very different, but outside of Brazil, and very much in the States and in Europe and anywhere else, quite honestly, we are not able to have centres as such.
Okay.
A building. So what do? We find a suitable location, very often in conjunction with the Quaker religion, who are very sympathetic to our teachings. The Catholic Church and the English Church and many other church organisations refuse to have anything to do with us. But wherever we can find a suitable room, we hire at so much per hour for the duration we need to hold a study meeting. Now, we can have that room, we hire that room for that short space of time, usually only once a week, but all the year round. So our little group continues to hold our study meeting on a Monday from 7:30 to 9 o'clock, an hour and a half. And this means that we are basically studying these books and these teachings. We used to have a lot of lectures, plus spiritual healing. But of recent times now, we've discovered that we don't learn very much from lectures. So I started developing just a study, a group study. Everybody participates. I usually direct the meeting. We do need to have somebody to direct always the study, but everybody is asked at different moments to read and to comment or to ask questions. We exchange ideas, we look at everything, we discuss it, and the situation is so different now because people are really learning and coming to understand. And I noticed to my great joy that other groups even in other countries, they're all doing the same thing. The study is what is important.
No, that's good to know.
Even in our group now, we no longer use healers.
Okay.
We know, we've always taught with spiritual healing, that the physical person, is only a channel for the good healing coming from the spiritual world. They allowed us to do this. It was helpful for us sometimes. And people who didn't believe in the airy-fairy spirits would sometimes be happy to take these special energies from another physical person. So it had its use and its purpose. But I am encouraging the groups here, the small groups, because the big groups don't want to change at all, but the small groups, to understand that the healing always comes from the spiritual world. And I direct each week 2 different groups of study. And I'm so pleased, and even the English people are finding that they can lift themselves up in thought, reach up, and they can feel the good energies coming direct from the spiritual world to them. They don't really need the physical human healer at all. And I think that this is a good step into the future and what we need to do.
Indeed. Janet, having said that about the study, which is so important, as we know, it's paramount, and so we need the books. What was the situation, for example, when you first, here in the UK, when you were here in the early stages, about the books in English on Spiritism? How was that? And can you tell us a little bit about your work, which is very important in this process of translating books into English? Can you tell us?
Now I see more clearly, because I could take your question in various directions. Yes, the great proliferation of Spiritist books in Brazil meant that all the books were in Portuguese. But when I arrived back in London, I found that there were 2 books by Allan Kardec that had been translated while Allan Kardec was still alive, translated into English by an English lady called Anna Blackwell. And it was still possible to find a few copies of this edition, which I avidly sought after and got enough for my study group. But we could also see that the language was a little bit archaic, because that was 150 years ago. And I had also been advised by the Brazilian medium Chico Xavier that I had the task, I was being asked from the spiritual world to translate the Gospel according to Spiritism. When that actually, first of all, happened, I was totally shocked and horrified and said, I can't do it, it can't be meant for me to do. So I have to my shame, I have to admit that it was several years before I actually began the work. But while I was still in Brazil, I did eventually begin to do that translation. And based on the original French book, because remember, Kardec was French and all the original books came in French. Eventually, after I came back to England, I still hadn't finished that translation, but eventually it did get finished, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe that it was finally published. I finally published it in 1987 in English. I've tried to do various other books since. I don't have yet many books that have been done because I found my life got so enveloped with administration, giving lectures, teaching about the teachings, and organising how people could organise their groups to the best advantage and to maintain the pure teachings from the spiritual world, because unfortunately we all think we know better or can do better, or we'll or this might seem a bit dull, so let's add something else in and cheer it all up and jig it up a bit. And of course this is something we cannot allow within Spiritist teachings. People have followed the Bible for all these thousands of years, and they never decided it needed jigging up. And we feel exactly the same about the Spiritist teachings, because they are based on the second book, the new, isn't it terrible, I don't remember now what we call the New Testament, the Old Testament and the New Testament. So these teaching books are all based on the New Testament as supposedly brought by Jesus, but only through word of mouth.
Sure.
Jesus never wrote anything. And they are to be taken very seriously, as they are. So I very much regret, and I feel sure that I've fallen very far short of the tasks that I should have fulfilled in this incarnation, but I'm still struggling and still hope to be able to publish or edit a few more books and things before it's my turn to go back to the spiritual world.
Because I think you have done a lot, and with the books and you have helping to translate more and more messages from what I've seen in books, and we can even mention about this book as well that you have helped to
yes,
write
the last
introduction.
publication. I think it's no, it isn't the last publication, but one of the last publications. Well, last year I edited, and we have a new publishing company here called the Round Table. We published 3 books. One was a translation of one of the books that had been received in Brazil by Chico Xavier, automatic writing, and a spiritual author, Emmanuel. But the other 2, interestingly enough, are 2 books that we discovered also through automatic writing in this country, in the UK, by British mediums. The first book we published, Shadows Lifted from Death, was only discovered by the relatives when they came to go through all the things in the house of the medium. And to my surprise, but my joy, that when they found all this automatic writing, they decided it was worth looking at and reading, and then they decided definitely it could be published, but they didn't have money to publish it, but it wasn't thrown in the rubbish bin. And that is a fascinating story. Somebody who came back from the so-called dead to explain what happened to them when they woke up and found themselves still alive. and gives us a lot of hints on how we should be living our present incarnation and how we can find much more happiness and joy in life. And it states very clearly what the real purpose of physical life is all about. So many people think it has no significance, it's for nothing. Oh, we only live once, let's do whatever we like, and it doesn't matter. Well, we can do whatever we like because we have free will, but it certainly matters. And it's better to find out now before we do any more damage to ourselves. The second book is similar. The person was a victim on the
Titanic?
yeah, the name slipped out of my mind at that moment. Was a victim of the disaster of Titanic. That was in 1912. And in 1920 he made communication with his daughter and a friend and explained to them how they could do automatic writing. Remember, he was talking to them from the spiritual world, and he organized them so that they could write his story of what he found when he got back to the spiritual world. But first of all, he explains something that's happening very frequently on our planet at this phase in time: mass discarnations, great numbers of people in disasters being killed, most dreadful tragedy, and etc., etc., our attitudes. And he explains what happens from the spiritual side of life. And we see how important these events are for those that go, and how they are treated, what awaits them, the organisation on the spiritual world. If we have a big tragedy on the physical side of life, we get the ambulances, we get the police, we get the fire engine, and etc., etc. Everybody rushes. And there's not a great deal of difference in the spiritual world, because they have their own team of helpers in accidents as well. But of course it's actually not even an accident, it's a planned program. And everybody who is taken back to the spiritual world, it's an individual but special cases, and you need to read the book about that. And we also come to see that those of us who are left here, we've lost our loved ones, the children have been killed, and we find a whole totally different perspective on life. And after explaining all of that, there is the rest of the book. It's not a very big book, not a very long book, but the various other chapters show us why the things that happen to us are happening, and how we can look at life from a different perspective, knowing first and foremost that we are immortal beings. There really is no such thing as death. It is a changing from one sphere of life to the next. And how we can live better, grow more spiritually, and find greater happiness. And say these from two English mediums, despite the fact that perhaps I'm even being very audacious to say what I'm going to say now, but the spiritualists still are arguing as to whether we are immortal in the sense of coming back and forth, coming back to physical life many times. They say we go on living after death. Oh yes, there's no doubt about that. But the rest of it they still are not sure about.
That's the biggest difference, isn't it, about Spiritism and Janet? Can you just tell us, maybe in summary? I think I will just make this conclusion here. I think you have told us your experience of Spiritism here in the UK, and how can you see the teachings in future in the UK, and in your perception, what's the most valuable meaning of these teachings? You have said that during your interview, but can you just summarize for all of us what's the main contribution to Spiritism to our lives as human beings on earth? And specifically here, that you brought these teachings, you came from Brazil, and then to the UK, and brought, I would say, Spiritism to this nation. And how can we get the people here the benefits of the good teachings of Spiritism?
This is a question very often asked, not just to me, but to many people who, perhaps I should say many Brazilians who are Spiritists in this country. We don't have a ready-made answer, because each one of us is a living being. We're all totally individual. We are all of different ages. We are all at different moments of realization as to what life is all about. And usually, all over our planet, what life is all about goes no further than this particular physical life that we are living at this moment. We cannot make people believe. People have to come to believe because that is the truth for them. So we have to be extremely patient and persistent in the sense of continuing our attempts to bring these teachings to people. We remember that in the New Testament, Jesus talks about the fact that we must sow the seeds, and that not all the seeds are going to fall on fertile ground. A lot of the seeds we sow will fall on rocks and never begin to grow. Others will grow a little bit on more fertile land, but will wither away and never come to fruition. And in actual fact, in comparison with the number of seeds that we can sow, it's only a very minute portion that comes to harvest and produce. And Jesus was telling us here that we have to be very, very patient. Our job is not to convert. Our job is just to sow the seeds. The helpers of Jesus from the spiritual level, who never tire and never stop working, will be the ones that will be the farmers hoping to bring a harvest. But if nature is not in accordance, the harvest will often be very small and sometimes not even at all. So we are merely the sowers of seeds. If we constantly sow the seeds, We know that in time, and this can be as long as millenniums, not next incarnation, we will have a harvest. If we think back, if we can manage to think back when Jesus, more than 2,000 years ago, brought the teachings, and for those of us who are happy today to be studying the teachings, getting to know the teachings, seeing the legitimacy of these teachings. Now compare then and now. We have to see that there's nothing more than a drop in the ocean that has really come to fruition in 2,000 years. So we know that the process is very, very slow. But when a seed does come to fruition, that person will never ever turn back. It's impossible, because when you believe, and even more when you have real faith and trust in Jesus and the Creator of the universe, you can't turn back. You can only keep going forward. So we compare something between Brazil and England. We have to look at the characteristics of these two countries. We have to look at the history of these two countries and the everyday, present-day customs. I've many times made the comment, if we were to take all the good of the Brazilian nation and all the good of the British nation and put them together, we'd have a perfect world. So what I'm saying here is, everywhere there is good and bad. Everywhere there is progress and the contrary. At any one time in particular, one nation may predominate with one good aspect more than another, and another country may predominate in bad things more than another. That is how nature works, how life works. The English people that have been to Brazil and found the real Brazil, not the tourist Brazil, the real Brazil of the everyday people in Brazil, will know for themselves individually what they've gained from this. The Brazilians coming to England, as they are in quite large quantities and living here for 3-4 years, usually as a minimum, sometimes adopting this country and staying here forever, they will also become aware of what they've benefited. But it's always individual. There's no blanket thing. Football in Brazil has helped Brazil come to be standing out in the world panorama of this planet. It's so interesting that Brazil, despite being such a gigantic country, it had, today it's considerably larger and I can't quote the numbers, but in 51 when I landed in Brazil, the population ratio was very, very small. And it was really only around the coastal side of Brazil where the population, the interior, was almost entirely unpopulated. and Brazil nuts, and like in my case with Carmen Miranda, different things. Brazil was a name that was known, but it didn't really signify anything. And football has opened the fact to the world that this enormous country exists and that it has tremendous potential. Although the football is not the same as the Spiritist teachings, but it's made Brazil open to the world. And it's so interesting that we still cannot know exactly why. With one book in the late 1880s, no, the middle, I should say, the middle of the 1880s, one book arrived in Brazil that has changed the whole status of everything in that country. I've realized many times that, because I said, but why Brazil? And today Brazil has a representation of every country in the world living there. It is a truly multinational country. The characteristics from the north down to the south vary from, excuse this expression, but I would say a reasonable amount of primitive beliefs and superstitions in the north to very, very cold-heartedness, disbelief in the south.
Yeah.
But they've all joined together with a total belief in God, yes, and Jesus. Whatever else.
Yeah.
The Spiritist teachings are a great threat to the Catholic religion in Brazil. And they are quoted by everybody constantly, despite the fact that there has been an infiltration of voodoo and all of the other levels of spirituality. But the most amazing factor that I've come to realize why Brazil, until these books were published and sent to Brazil, the country had been dormant. Always. It was unpopulated, vastly covered by wonderful tropical jungles that were responsible for the cleansing of the air of our planet, maintaining all the natural things that we need to keep our planet going. And it was clean. There'd never been a bloody war all over the country. When you look back here at Europe, Europe is totally saturated in human blood. There'd been nothing else but bloody wars all over here as far back as anybody can remember. How can you put strong, deep spirituality there? You can't. Brazil was clean. It had been kept clean in order to allow the development, attraction of all peoples from all nations with a certain degree of spiritualization, and the spiritual workers being able to work in a clean ambient, developing the whole thing. I see things from these points of view, and it becomes in Emmanuel via Chico Xavier has explained some of these things in some of his wonderful books of teachings that he's brought to us. And we are now beginning, not through me, through other translators, we are beginning to get English translations of some of these very special books, that are continuation of the Allan Kardec books. And so little by little, when we are able to expand our minds and the thought of the universe, and not just be stuck around planet Earth. Is there anywhere else inhabited? You know, we're the most intelligent, we're the only inhabited planet in the universe, and blah, 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 blah. And excuse me, with my special frankness at this moment, I say, with this lot of rubbish.
Yes.
Because the creator of all things is the supreme intelligence of the universe. It is not a person. This takes me back, reminds me of that question number 1 in that book that so struck me. The question that everybody has always asked and still goes on asking, who's God? Who is God? Who is God? Who means a person. This book asks the questions, what is God? Aha! There we have a difference. God is the creative force of all the universe. Why are there all those stars out there that are all planets? Because creation is continuous. It always has been, it always will be. We cannot understand, we cannot explain this any more than I can explain or remember when I first became human. My first incarnation as a human being. But that doesn't matter. The most important thing for us is we are here today, wherever we are, whichever country we are, and what can we do to find happiness and to progress spiritually, and lots of other very special, wonderful things through the Spiritist teachings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet, for your wisdom and your...
It's not mine. It's inspiration, my dear friend.
Thanks so much, Janet, for your time, and thanks so much.